this is the demonstration for an IV cannulation and fluid administration today. So the first thing that we always want to do is gather our supplies. So for this, we're going to need some non-sterile gloves, a tourniquet, cleansing wipes, an appropriate sized angiocath. Here we have an 18 gauge, 1 1/4 inch. We'll need a tegaderm to cover the site. We'll need tape, which I have right here. I've also ripped off some pieces of tape and put them on the table in preparation for the IV insertion. We will need a giving set, which we have right here. You'll notice this giving set is the one that has several ports and a little blue piece of plastic that indicates that you can put it into a pump. And a sharps container, which you can see over here. In order to be able to draw some blood work off of this IV site, you will also need a IV lock, which we have here, the vacutainer that's appropriate for the blood draw that attaches to the IV lock, and then the blood tubes. Here we have small lavender for a CBC and 2 6 mil lavender top tubes for a type and screen, which is something that you might typically draw. We also will need some fluid for the fluid administration. We always want to make sure that we have the proper fluid. In this case, we're using lactated ringers, 1 liter. We're making sure that the expiry date, the fluid is not expired. We're looking at how the fluid looks, how the bag looks, making sure there's no holes, the fluid is clear, and then we can go ahead. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce myself to the person and provide my pronouns. So I'm Carly. I use she, her pronouns. And the client, I would ask them to introduce themselves as well. Wash your hands or clean your hands. And this client has obviously already been told, talked to about the reason for this IV today. So we've gotten consent from this person to give them an IV. We've washed our hands. We've checked the IV fluid, the expiry date, clarity for leaks, and we will hang that on the pole. I'm going to open my IV bag. So we've made sure it is what we think it is. Take the bag out. Plastic. There, sorry, that's quite loud. And then we're going to hang it on the pole, which is right behind me here. I'm going to take the giving set now and remove the protective covering, make sure that we have the proper one. Take our giving set over to our IV bag. Make sure we're going to close this rolling clamp and take off. We always want to make sure that we're keeping this end sterile to that end sterile. So this end comes off. We're maintaining sterility. And sterile to sterile. Give it a little twist. Now we're going to give it a squeeze. Fill the chamber about halfway full by squeezing it. And that looks really good. Now to prime the line, we're going to get this all straightened out. Take our line and grab a basket here. Hold the end of the line over the basket and let the fluid run through the line all the way to the end. Now you do want to go through the line and make sure that you don't have any air bubbles running through the line, too big of air bubbles running through your line. So to do that, you have a look, examine your line. You can turn these little guys over, give them a little flick, and the air bubbles will run right through. Once your line is primed, you can hang it over your IV pole in preparation for your IV start. So we've talked to this person, gotten their consent. Now we're going to start their IV. So we're going to have a look at their arms and see where we might be able to find a good vein for IV insertion. You can have a look at their hand, look at their arms, look at right here, looks like a nice spot. So in order to do this, first thing we do is put the tourniquet on. You're going to have to apply it quite tightly so that the veins will pop up nicely, but you can see where you want to put it. We're going to go right here. Clean the site. And allow that site to dry for 30 seconds. While the site is drying, it's a good opportunity to open up your equipment. So I have my angiocath, my tegaderm, my vacutainer, and my IV lock, as well as my tape. Okay. So the site's dry. Now we've let it dry for approximately 30 seconds. We've identified where we want to go, where we're going to put the angiocath. And open our angiocath here. Now we do have a sharp in our hand, so it's important to note that and be very careful. Typically it's a good practice to make sure that the needle slides over the angiocath nice and smoothly before you use it on a person. So now we're going to anchor the vein, and we're going to want to do this, insert the cannula at about a 30-degree angle, making sure that you remember that this needle and the cannula are both sterile. So it's very important not to touch them with your glove or your gloved thumb. So we're going to insert the cannula after we've anchored the vein at about a 30-degree angle until we get flashback, which we would see in this chamber right here where my finger's pointing. So we've got our flashback. We're going to insert the catheter a little bit further, a couple millimeters, and then we're going to pull back the needle and advance the catheter as we do that at the same time. So you hear a click. Now the needle is in the chamber and it's locked, so it is not going to be a danger to you as a sharp. So now we've got this in, so now we're going to take off the needle and we're going to put on our IV lock. So this end right here goes to that end right there. So press the vein, remove that. There we go. Now our IV lock is in place, and we can draw our blood. And you want to leave the tourniquet on if you're drawing blood. So I'm going to tape it down just so that it is taped and we don't have to worry about it moving around too much on us. going to take our vacutainer and clean the end that we're going to attach, because it did touch, so we want to make sure that that stays clean and sterile, with another alcohol swab. We're going to wait 30 seconds before we attach this. Screws on there, and now you take your blood. Nothing's going to come out of this arm because there is no fluid in it, but typically you push it on there and the vacutainer will withdraw the blood for you. So 1, 2, and 3. Now that that's complete, we can remove our vacutainer and attach our line, which we have already primed and set up behind us. So this cap has maintained the sterility on the end of your line, and you've taken off the vacutainer and maintained the sterility on the end of your IV lock. Now you're going to go over to your bag and release the roller clamp and ensure that the fluid is flowing into the chamber and dripping nicely. While that's doing that, you also want to look at your IV site to ensure that the fluid is going into, sorry, I got to remove the tourniquets before you turn on the roller clamp, to make sure the fluid is going into the person's arm. So it is, the site looks good, there's no swelling, we know it's not interstitial, the fluid is running freely, and then we can do the rest of our taping. Taped securely. The IV cannula is not going to go anywhere. This person. So now we want to make sure that we dispose of everything that we've used correctly. So our sharps will go in the sharps container. Anything, this is also a sharp. The vacutainer does have a sharp needle in it, so we also put that in the sharps container. And then everything else that we have can just go in the garbage. And we will take our blood work that we've drawn and submit it to the lab. And after we've done all this, it's very important to document the procedure. So we would document the procedure either on paper or in the computer, depending on what your site uses for documentation. And then we will come back and administer some medication.